There's been a mistake, the woman said, looking right past me at my aunt. She told me you moved away years ago. My aunt's face didn't just go pale. It went the kind of white you only see on people who've been caught. Not surprised. Caught. And I just stood there, holding a bag of groceries, watching 32 years of lies unravel in about 4 seconds. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Claire. I'm 28 years old, and until about 7 months ago, I thought the only family I had left in this world was my Aunt Diane. My mom died when I was 6. Ovarian cancer, fast and brutal. She was gone in less than a year from diagnosis. My dad held it together for a while. He was a mechanic, worked at a shop off Route 9 in Millbrook, upstate New York. He coached my Little League team even though I was the only girl, made pancakes every Sunday, and kept a photo of my mom on the dashboard of his truck until the day he died. That was when I was 11. Black ice on the interstate in January. He never made it home from a parts run. After that, it was Aunt Diane. She was my mom's oldest sister, and she swooped in fast. So fast that I didn't have time to fully understand what was happening before I was in her car, heading to her house in Stamford, Connecticut, surrounded by furniture that smelled like someone else's life. She had a nice house. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a yard with an actual fence around it. She worked in HR at a mid-sized insurance company and wore blazers every day, even on weekends. She was never warm. That's the most honest way I can say it. She fed me, clothed me, made sure I went to school. She came to parent-teacher conferences. She signed the permission slips. But she never once hugged me without me initiating it first. And even then it felt like hugging a filing cabinet. I told myself that was just her way. Some people aren't built for softness. I understood that. I was grateful to have a roof and a person who remembered to buy the right cereal. What I didn't understand, what I wouldn't understand for a very long time, was that Aunt Diane's involvement in my life had very little to do with family loyalty and almost everything to do with money. My parents had life insurance. My dad's policy was $175,000. My mom had taken out a smaller one before she got sick, $50,000. Both policies named me as the sole beneficiary. Because I was a minor when my dad died, Diane was appointed as my legal guardian and the custodian of that money, held in trust until I turned 25. I didn't know any of this until I was 26. I graduated from UConn with a degree in communications, moved to Hartford, got a job at a small marketing firm doing content and social media. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked the work. I had a studio apartment that cost me $1,420 a month, a secondhand couch I'd carried up 3 flights of stairs with my friend Priya, and a savings account I was quietly proud of. I saw Diane at holidays. We'd have dinner. She'd ask polite questions about work. I'd ask polite questions about her garden. And we'd both go home feeling like we'd fulfilled some obligation. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't a monster in any visible way. She was just distant. Always had been. The summer I turned 26, she called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember it was a Tuesday because I was eating a sad desk lunch of leftover Thai food and wishing I'd taken the day off. "I need to give you some paperwork," she said, "about your parents' estate. There wasn't much, but some things were finalized late, and I want you to have copies." We met at a diner near her office the following Saturday. She brought a manila envelope. Inside was a copy of my dad's will, some property documents, and a letter from an attorney I didn't recognize, a firm in Albany. The letter was a follow-up notice about a trust disbursement. It referenced a case number, a trustee, and an original amount. I almost folded it back up without reading it properly. But something made me stop. The original trust amount listed was $225,000. The disbursement paid to me at age 25, which I had never received, because I had never known it existed, was listed as $0 with a note, "Funds exhausted during guardianship period, documentation on file." I looked up at Diane. She was stirring her coffee and looking at the window. "What is this?" I asked. "Just standard estate stuff," she said, "nothing significant." I pointed to the number. "It says $225,000. She didn't blink fast enough. That's how I knew. A guilty person always takes a half second too long to look neutral. "There were costs," she said. Your schooling, your healthcare, the household expenses. Raising a child isn't cheap, Claire. It says funds exhausted. That means it's gone. I just explained that. I didn't say anything else. I put the letter back in the envelope, thanked her for lunch, and drove home, shaking so badly I had to pull over twice. I want to be clear about something. I don't know if I would have ever pushed further on my own. I'm not naturally confrontational. I spent most of my childhood learning to be easy, undemanding, grateful for what I had. The instinct to not make waves runs deep when you're a kid who depends on someone else's goodwill to survive. But Priya told me to call an attorney. You don't have to do anything with the information, she said, sitting on my sad second-hand couch with a glass of wine. Just find out what the numbers are supposed to mean. I called an attorney named Marcus Webb, a probate lawyer out of Hartford who took a 1-hour consultation for $150. He looked at the documents, asked me several questions, and then sat back in his chair and said very calmly, Miss Claire, it appears your guardian spent or redirected the majority of your trust fund without proper documentation, and the accounting submitted to the court is either incomplete or inaccurate. He asked if I wanted to pursue it. I thought about the filing cabinet hugs. I thought about the photo of my mum my dad kept on his dashboard. I thought about the word exhausted printed next to $225,000 like it was a library book she'd returned. I said yes. The legal process moved slowly, and I can't walk you through every detail because most of it was paper and waiting. But what I can tell you is that Marcus requested full financial disclosures, that Diane's attorney pushed back hard, and that for 3 months I went to work every day and acted like nothing was happening. The worst part was Thanksgiving. I sat across from Diane at her dining room table, the same table I'd eaten at since I was 11 years old, and she passed me the sweet potatoes and asked about my job, and I said everything was fine and meant none of it. She knew I'd hired an attorney by that point because her attorney had sent a letter. But we sat there and performed our ritual dinner like two people in a play who have both forgotten why they agreed to do the show. Marcus told me not to say anything that could complicate the case. So I didn't. I just helped her clear the dishes and drove home alone. It was in February, a few weeks before the case was scheduled for a formal mediation, that I had the strangest afternoon of my life. I was at the grocery store, not some special place. Just a Stop and Shop 2 blocks from my apartment, the one with the cart that always pulls to the left. It was a Wednesday, around 4 o'clock, and I was exhausted and distracted and just trying to get through the list. I was in the canned goods aisle when I noticed an older woman struggling to reach something on the top shelf. Not elderly exactly, maybe late 60s, early 70s, well-dressed, with silver hair she wore in a low bun. She had a cart and a quiet kind of dignity about her. The kind that made me think she'd never ask a stranger for help in her life. But she was clearly struggling. The can she wanted was pushed back just far enough that she couldn't get to it without tipping forward. I didn't think about it. I just walked over and got it for her. She thanked me genuinely, and we had one of those small, pleasant exchanges that happen between strangers sometimes. She mentioned she was making soup. I said I love soup. She asked what kind. I said anything my mother used to make. She laughed a little, said that was a good answer. Then she asked if I was from Millbrook. I stopped. Yes, I said. How did your accent, she said. Upstate. I used to live near there. She paused. What's your last name? I told her. She went very still, and then she said something I have replayed in my head probably 300 times since. Your mother was Eleanor, she said. It wasn't a question. My mother's name was Eleanor. No one called her that. Everyone called her Ellie. Yes, I said. She was. The woman's name was Ruth. Call away. And she told me, standing in the canned goods aisle of a Stop and Shop on a Wednesday afternoon, that she had been my mother's neighbor for 6 years in Millbrook, that she had watched my parents fall in love, that she had held me as a newborn, and that she had tried for years to find out what happened to me after my father died. She had sent letters. She had called Diane's number. She had even driven to the house once, she said. And Diane had answered the door and told her I had gone to live with family in another state. She said there was no forwarding information. Ruth had lost her husband 4 years ago. She had moved to Hartford to be closer to her daughter. She said she thought about my mother every single time she made the soup recipe Ellie had given her. We stood in that aisle for 45 minutes. She gave me her number. I called her that night. We talked for 2 hours, and it turned out that Ruth's late husband had been a property attorney. What happened next, I need to explain carefully, because I want to be accurate. Ruth, it turned out, had known things about my parents' financial situation that even I hadn't known. My father had come to her husband, his name was Gerald, for a consultation years before the accident. Apparently, my dad had been concerned about what would happen to me if something happened to both of them. Gerald had helped him structure the trust properly and had kept notes. When Ruth heard I was in the middle of a probate dispute, she called her daughter, who was also an attorney. Her daughter's name was Patricia, and she specialized in exactly this kind of case. I want to be honest, I did not immediately call Patricia. I sat with it for about a week, because it felt too much like something that happens in a movie and not in real life. But Marcus, when I told him, was very direct. Call her. If she has access to the original documentation Gerald kept, that changes everything. Patricia had the files. Not all of them, but enough. Gerald had kept copies of the original trust documents, correspondence with my father, and a letter my dad had written, handwritten, 2 pages, outlining exactly what he wanted for me. Who the money was for, what it was meant to do. Patricia worked with Marcus. They filed together. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday in March. Diane arrived with her attorney, a man named Holt who wore a very expensive watch and looked at me like I was an inconvenience he planned to resolve quickly. I sat across the table from Diane for the first time in an adversarial setting. She looked older than I remembered. Smaller somehow. She was wearing the same kind of blazer she always wore, and she had her hands folded on the table, and she didn't look at me directly for the first 20 minutes. The mediator went through the documentation. Marcus and Patricia laid out the accounting irregularities. Holt pushed back, used words like discretionary expenses and reasonable interpretation and cost of care. He was very polished. Then Patricia put Gerald's files on the table, and Holt stopped talking. The original documentation showed the exact amount, the exact terms, and, critically, a letter from my father specifying that the funds were not to be used for general household expenses, but held and transferred to me at 25. The cost of care interpretation Diane had been relying on was directly contradicted by the founding documents. Diane fired Holt 2 weeks later. I heard this from her next attorney, who contacted Marcus to discuss a settlement. I need to tell you about the day I brought Ruth to meet Diane. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something Marcus advised. And honestly, it wasn't something I fully thought through. But Ruth had been meeting me for coffee on Saturday mornings. She was becoming someone I looked forward to seeing in a way I hadn't expected. And that particular Saturday, I needed to drop something off at Diane's house. A form that needed a signature. Something minor and legal. I asked Ruth to wait in the car. She said she'd come in. She wanted to see the old photos. I should have said no, but I didn't think it would matter. We rang the doorbell. Diane answered. And when she saw Ruth standing on her front step, her face did something I had never seen it do before. It collapsed, not into tears, into pure, exposed fear. The kind of look that doesn't leave room for pretending. Ruth said, very quietly, "Hello, Diane." Diane said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "I didn't know you were in Connecticut." Clearly, Ruth said. I don't know exactly what Ruth knew or suspected before that moment. But I think in that doorway, both of them understood something that I was still catching up to. That the story Diane had told about what happened after my father died, the one where I was taken care of and nothing was hidden and everything was reasonable, had just run out of road. We didn't go inside. The settlement came through in May. I'm not able to share the exact figure, but I can tell you it was significant, and that it included repayment with interest, and that Diane's attorney negotiated hard and still didn't get everything she wanted. There was no criminal charge. Marcus told me the threshold for criminal elder fraud is different from civil liability, and that civil was the path that made sense for my situation. I chose to trust him on that. Diane did not reach out to me after. No letter, no call. I've thought about whether I expected one. I think I expected the kind of letter that apologizes without admitting anything, the kind that says, "I know you're hurting," without ever saying because of what I did. Maybe it's better she didn't send it. What I have instead is this. I have Saturday mornings with Ruth, who makes soup sometimes and brings a thermos and talks about my mother like she knew her, because she did. She tells me things I didn't know, that my mom was stubborn in a funny way, that she once argued with the cashier for 10 minutes about a coupon she was technically wrong about, that she wore the same pair of earrings every single day and said she didn't trust jewelry that needed to be changed, that she used to sing off key in the car and act like she was performing at Carnegie Hall. Ruth brought me a photo 2 months ago. It was from a block party, summer 1992. My parents are young in it. My dad has a mustache he clearly thought looked good, and my mom is laughing at something off camera, and she's holding a baby. Me, presumably, though I'm small enough that I could be anyone's. I cried when she gave it to me. I didn't try to stop it. Ruth handed me a napkin and didn't say anything, which was the exact right thing to do. I have Marcus's number saved in my phone as Marcus, the good kind of lawyer, and I will use him again someday for something boring and completely undramatic, like buying a house. I have Priya, who said call an attorney on a couch and change the course of my life. And I have a savings account now that looks very different from how it used to. And every time I check it, I think about my dad writing that handwritten letter, 2 pages, making sure I'd be okay. He wasn't wrong to trust someone, he was wrong about who. But I think, and I'm still working on believing this, but I think the money found its way back to me because I reached up and handed a stranger a can of soup on a Wednesday afternoon. Because I didn't think about it. Because some part of me still, after everything, moved toward people when they needed something. My mom used to say that kindness has a long memory. I didn't know what that meant when I was little. I do now, and if Diane ever does send that letter, the one that apologizes without admitting anything, I think I'll throw it in the trash. Not out of anger, just because some doors don't need to stay open. Some doors you close quietly, and you walk away, and you let the life you were always supposed to have finally begin. Mine already has. I've thought a lot about what would have happened if I hadn't reached up for that can. If I'd been in a different aisle. If I'd been running late and walked past without stopping. If I'd been too tired and too inside my own head, which, honestly, I was that afternoon, and just kept moving. It would have been so easy. Nobody would have thought less of me. Ruth would have gotten the can eventually, or she wouldn't have, and we never would have known each other's names. That's the part that stays with me. Not the legal outcome, not the settlement, not any of it. Just the fact that one small, unconsidered moment, the kind you don't even decide to do, you just do it, turned out to be the hinge everything else swung on. I didn't help Ruth because I expected anything. I didn't even think of it as helping, really. It was just what you do when someone needs something you can reach. My dad was like that. He'd stop on the side of the road for a stranger with a flat tire in the middle of winter. Not because he was trying to be good, but because it didn't occur to him not to. I think I absorbed that from him without realizing it. And for a long time after he was gone and I was living in Diane's house learning to be small and easy and grateful, I thought that quality had been pressed out of me. That I'd become someone who kept her head down and her hands to herself, but it was still there. It just needed the right moment. What I've had to sit with, and this took me a long time to work through, is the question of Diane. Not what she did, because that's clear enough, but why someone becomes the kind of person who looks at a grieving 11-year-old and sees an opportunity. I don't think she was born that way. I think people make choices, one at a time, and each small choice makes the next one easier. Until one day they're sitting across a diner table watching a young woman read a letter about $225,000, and they say there were costs without flinching. That's not fate. That's not some invisible force punishing her. That's just the accumulated weight of the decisions she made catching up. And the same thing, in the opposite direction, is true for me. Every time I chose not to become bitter, and there were years where that was genuinely a choice, not a default. I stayed open enough that when Ruth was standing in that aisle, struggling quietly with something she'd never ask a stranger for, I saw her, not as an inconvenience, not as someone else's problem, just as a person who needed something I could give. That's what I want to remember when things get hard again, because they will. It's not about being rewarded for goodness. That's too clean, too transactional. It's about staying the kind of person who can recognize a moment and meet it. Because those moments don't announce themselves. They look exactly like a Wednesday afternoon at the grocery store with a cart that pulls to the left. My mother apparently used to say that kindness has a long memory. I believe that now. Not because of anything mystical. Just because I've seen what it looks like when a can of soup changes everything.